Daring in the Desert, Chapter 18. Not long after Lilius returned to Algiers, two more English women came to join the team. They were Gertrude Targot and May Eustace. "Look at all these children," said Gertrude as she went out the great studded door of number 2 Rue de Croissant. "They're everywhere. If you look to the right, they bump into your left side, and if you look to your left, they'll crash into you on the right." May grinned. "There's certainly no shortage of children in the streets, steps, and lanes around our house." When the women discussed this at their next meal, Lilius had an idea. "Do you think we could run classes for some of the children?" she asked. It was decided to begin by running a class for boys. They prayed about it, and then the class began. At first it went well, but then the boys started misbehaving, just in little ways at first, and then they started to behave really badly, in fact so badly that the class had to be stopped. "Well, what about a class for girls?" asked May. "They might listen better." Gertrude wondered if they might try a class for Jewish girls. There was a good number of Jewish families in the area of new houses very near to where the missionaries lived. And that worked. The Jewish girls loved the class, and they listened very eagerly to what they heard about Jesus. "The only day that the women go out is Friday," May said, when they were wondering about how best to meet the Arab women. "That's the day the women and girls go to the cemeteries." Gertrude looked a little puzzled. "I find that very strange," she admitted. "They're in their houses all week, and on Fridays, when the men and boys are at the mosques, they choose to go to the cemeteries." Lilius explained that the women gathered in cemeteries to meet up with their friends. That was the only place they were allowed to meet. And the men were quite happy for them to go there because they took flowers to put on the graves of their ancestors. That sparked an idea. And before long, Lilius and the other missionaries rented a room near the cemetery where Arab women could go for a cup of tea and a chat after their weekly trip to lay down flowers. There they told their visitors about the Lord Jesus and how he rose from the dead on the first Easter Sunday. "We've never heard of anyone rising from the dead," an Arab woman said after a chat with Lilius. "Tell us who that was and how it happened." Lilius was very happy to do that. She loved talking to the women about the Lord Jesus. In fact, there was nothing she liked better. From that time on, more and more people became interested in God, and the little church in Algiers grew. Some people went for a short while and then stopped, but a good number kept on going. One of them was Biliad, who had become a Christian when he was in England. "How did you learn about Jesus before you started coming here to church?" Blanche asked. "I had my Bible," explained the man. "I just read my Bible over and over again. That's how I got to know Jesus." Of course, coming to the meetings and being with other Christians also helped Biliad. The house in Rue de Croissant was often full of noise and laughter because children were welcome all the time. When they knocked on the heavy studded door, they were asked in and often treated to syrup sandwiches. 2 little girls came round especially often and were especially welcomed. Their names, nicknames really, were Pink Shell and Brown Berry. The girls were just street urchins, Lilius explained in a letter to a friend. They had nowhere to call home, and they looked to kind people in the city to feed them. Slowly, the 2 girls wormed their way into our hearts, and it was Blanche who gave in and eventually adopted them as her own. Of course, Lilius did many sketches of the 2 little girls, and it was quite obvious from her journal that Blanche wasn't the only one who loved Pink Shell and Brown Berry. While they still missed the braiding children, now Blanche had 2 little girls of her own, and they lived as a happy little family in that very big house. What Lilius thought about number 2 Rue de Croissant the first time she saw it turned out to be absolutely true. It was a splendid house for playing hide and seek. Over the years, there was a great deal of coming and going between Algeria and Britain. Some people went to help the missionaries for short times, and others spent longer with them. Lilius, Blanche, and Helen also came and went because most years they all needed to get away from the heat for a time. the climate in Algiers sapped their strength and energy. It was especially hard on Lilius, who had a heart condition and, despite all you've read about her, tired very easily. Although she loved traveling and was a real adventurer, the missionary life was hard work. In the spring of 1900, Helen and Lilius went south to the desert town of Tolga. There they rented a house. "It's strange not staying in our tent," commented Lilius as they investigated the little house they would live in for some weeks. "I like it," Helen said. Later she wrote to a friend, "The walls are made of earth, and the floor too. Thatched palm leaves are on the low roof. I don't imagine they would keep out rain, but that's not much of a problem here in the desert. There's a little courtyard, and that's where we'll sleep, outside, under the stars." When the two missionaries discussed what they would do in Tolga, they decided to pitch their tent in a courtyard and hold meetings there. They were glad they did, for people came, and then more people came, and even more after that. Most of them were men, as usual, and some were very keen to hear about Jesus. It made Lilius want to come back to Tolga to stay, at least for a longer time than the 3 weeks that they planned to be there that time. I've no doubt that's what she and Helen talked about on the long journey back to Algiers.